broad overview of the types of activities that we have produced over the past 10 years since I arrived. So if my colleagues in the Coody location could play that, I would appreciate it.
We're witnessing something very, very special here and something you just wouldn't find anywhere else. So we're very excited about this, and of course we're very excited about all of our guests joining us.
Teddy, if I can jump in here for a second. Look,
yeah.
We're talking about a lot of things. The purpose of this piece is entertainment. It is a diversion which is meant to be charming and captivate people in whatever way is most, at that moment, charming. But, guys, above all, it's got to have more contrast.
The important thing to remember in Beethoven is that there is a distinction, but it's on a scale of gradation. So a dot for him, and then a tiny slash, and then a bigger slash. They're all part of this, a similar thing that also implies a slight accent as a pianist.
Okay.
Right?
Again, thank you for joining us today, and I think we should probably just play for you, and then we'll talk, if that's all right.
Okay, great. Sounds good.
Okay.
That sounded really good. I'm really happy. That's very nice. I have a bunch of comments, if that's all right. The first thing I would say is, you know, one of the things that was cheating about this piece, in the cheating, lying, stealing kind of thing, is that I wrote all the percussion parts first. So the way I made the piece was I thought I'm going to make all these really complicated rhythms that do these weird patterns, and then I'm going to find notes. I'm just going to get the barest minimum notes that populate these rhythms and make these rhythms, you know, sound more interesting. So the reason why I bring that up is because the break drums and the percussion are the things that really have to sort of push everybody forward.
This transmission is happening with a system called Lola, which is a system that works to reduce the amount of time lag in a long distance communication over video.
Stylistically, all over the world, things are going to be slightly different. I loved what you did. I really enjoyed your playing very much. I thought the David was fantastic, even though it's not the way I would choose to play it. It's quite different. So I would urge you to look at other styles, and that's the idea of this. You know, you get to hear the different students. So that's very, very good.
And for me, it's very important that when you play, you have to play like it's your first time playing that piece. So you will bring more attention and more accuracy, you know, between what you can play and what is written in the part. That's what we do, unless you are a composer and you play your own music, which you didn't do because it's David, it's not your music, okay?
I think, to me, you need to think about a little bit more when you go to an audition, what the judge group need to hear from you. What do they want? Not only good sound, no mistakes, even music. They are looking for a good team member. So, are you a good team member for them? You have to ask yourself that question.
I think the David concerto was very good from all these things like rhythm and these things. I enjoyed it, and I like his sound, and yeah, I don't think that you should change something, because I think it was a good performance for me.
So that video is meant to just give a very quick snapshot of all of the activities that the New World Symphony conducts on an everyday basis here in Florida. And I'll say that our reasons for originally getting into distance learning and video streaming were very specific to our organization, and that is that we are a postgraduate music academy, but we don't have any faculty members that are here on a full-time basis, aside from one faculty member who coordinates all of the chamber music activities at New World. So what we do instead is we invite coaches or faculty from other organizations around the U.S. To come to Florida for short residencies and short visits, but that is supplemented with teaching that is provided online in this type of format we're using today. So that is it came out of a need that was very specific to the New World Symphony and the way that we operate on a daily basis. So 15 years into this experiment, it's become a vital part of our program, and institutionally in the United States, we have tried to establish ourselves as an example to be followed, but also as an organization that is very outward facing and willing to share the things that we have learned over time and to educate new partners and bring new collaborators online for the first time. So the slide presentation, which you can now see, and I'm going to go through in some detail. These things tend to be a little boring if we just stare at a bunch of slides and listen to me talk. So I'm really curious about any questions you might have. Please feel free to send those to Delma as we move through this presentation. But moving to the next slide, please. This is our campus in Miami Beach, Florida. We are located 1 block north of Lincoln Road, which is a very famous shopping mall. And this location that we are now in was formerly a ground parking lot. The building was designed by Frank Gehry Associates, pretty famous American architect. And in order to conform with the architectural aesthetic of Miami Beach, but to be more modern in our approach, we decided to make the building basically a giant glass box so that the community is welcome to view the activities that are going on inside. And as you can see in this picture, there's a large projection space on the right side of the building where we simulcast concerts on a bi-weekly basis during our season. Next slide, please. This is an interior picture of the concert hall, which we saw a little bit in the videos previously. It is one of the most advanced performance halls in the world and has been copied in various aspects since it opened in 2011. There is a 270-degree, which you can see here, projection mapping surface that covers the entirety of the canopy that surrounds the stage. The stage itself is on hydraulic lifts, so it has infinite permutations in terms of the height that it can be raised to, and certain sections of it can be raised to, and we've used that to great effect. But also the entire building and the performance hall have fiber optic cable, several thousand miles of it, running throughout the building to facilitate video conferences and any other kind of interactive online activities we can come up with. The performance hall is quite small compared to similar sized buildings. This hall seats approximately 754 people when we use every single seat we have. Next slide, please. So here's some more information about the New World Symphony. As I said before, we are a postgraduate educational institution, which means that on an annual basis, we accept about a third of our total student body, which is 87. So every year we admit approximately 30 new students to join this 3-year program. During our orchestral season, which runs from September to May, most years, we produce over 100 concert productions. So the students actually are a working orchestra in a lot of senses, but they're also offered to complement that educational programs that prepare them to be the leaders in whatever ensemble or professional musician role they go on to take after their time at New World Symphony. So that's a mix of training that comes from leadership to just performance excellence, and then to actually giving out of teaching and community engagement, that kind of thing. Next slide, please. So New World Symphony has been, as I said, a member of Internet 2, which is the research and education network that peers to the networks that are connecting today, since 2004. Over that time period, we have produced approximately, this is probably a low number in reality, but 2,000 musical teleconferences, as we call them, the types of activity that we're doing today. We also notably founded it is an annual workshop that happens here at New World every other year these days, but the Network Performing Arts Production Workshop, which I'll talk more about a little later on, but I think that's pretty relevant for this group because the idea is that the performing arts community in the US and in Europe all gather physically in one space each year to talk about emerging technologies, prominent projects that have lessons to be learned, and those kinds of things, and obviously interpersonal networking. So we're actually hosting that again this year, or this next year, in April of 2018. So we'll come back to that. But we also regularly participate in a variety of research projects that are very formal in nature and have papers published when they're finished, but also just one-off experiments and collaborative performances, which we'll talk more about as we move on. Next slide, please. So the next segment, I'm just going to talk in brief about the tools that we have used over these many years. Whenever we are, as I like to say, technology agnostic, meaning we don't believe in any one solution as the solution. We choose our video technology, our streaming technology, based on the goals of whatever the program is and the particular needs of that given situation. So the metrics or the things that we measure these tools by are loosely grouped into these 4 categories: ease of use, audio video quality, latency, and accessibility. Next slide, please. Just to define those for you, when I say ease of use, I mean the ease of actually setting up and running the software or hardware yourself. Oftentimes we find that end users or the musicians themselves are the ones responsible for scheduling, setting up, and actually producing these events themselves. So ease of use is a very important thing in that regard. Audio video quality, obviously for us and our students who are postgraduate music students, their level of musicianship and abilities to play their instruments are very high. So in order to give them a meaningful experience, we really need to provide them with the latest and greatest in terms of video resolution, audio resolution, and fidelity. So that one is pretty important for us at New World. Latency, it depends on the situation, but as you saw in the video, there are some activities we do these days where people are trying to play synchronously or in sync together over a very wide distance. It's less of a concern in a traditional kind of educational capacity. And then finally, accessibility. How widely is the platform used? How easy is it to acquire the components that you need to use these different software suites? Next slide, please. Just a quick shot. This is where we started back in 2004. I think that's a big screen cathode ray TV on the left-hand side, which you can't see very often anymore. Next slide, please. This was the first tool that I got to know in my performing arts over the internet life. The digital video transport system, fondly known as DVTS. And what was great about this application was that it ran on Firewire or DV spec video. So basically you took a Firewire camcorder, attached it to a Firewire port on your computer, plugged in a remote IP address and hit send, and it didn't do any kind of audio management or video manipulation. It was just raw audio video in, raw audio video out, and the audio was CD quality, which was important at the time. As I mentioned, fidelity is one of the biggest items for us. Next slide, please. It was also multicast enabled, which is less of a thing these days. It was free and continues to be free. You can still actually download and use this application if you want, although Firewire ports on computers and camcorders are harder and harder to come by or to find. Next slide, please. Some of the negative things about this tool are that it's quite slow. DV, as a video specification, includes about 200 of milliseconds of encoding delay. So it's not really useful in most situations for performing together at distance unless you're working with music or an art discipline like dance or potentially theater that can accommodate slightly longer delays than music. The video resolution is limited to standard definition, so again, that's kind of antiquated or an old standard at this point. There is no error correction, so if a packet gets lost or you lose data somewhere along the way, it's going to manifest as video noise or as audio artifacts. Next slide, please. The next tool that came out that was really promising and again is still available, it's still maintained by the University of Washington in Seattle, was originally a Microsoft product that they gifted to the university. It is also free. It is also Windows only. I didn't mention that, but DVTS is a Windows only application. Conference XP is great for a number of reasons. One, it works with most commodity or over-the-counter hardware, meaning any webcam or any audio interface works pretty well with it out of the box. Next slide, please. It also, in its current form, allows variable bandwidth usage for either video or audio. So what that means essentially is that you can control how much bandwidth is consumed for video and audio independently. So, for instance, if you're working with a remote campus somewhere that doesn't have a lot of bandwidth or connectivity, you can scale down the video to something similar to Skype, but keep CD quality audio to pair with that. So it's very powerful and very flexible. It also, because of the way that it works, is pretty good at doing security transversal. So if you're working with an organization that has very stringent or tough security guidelines, it can help you to get around those things. Next slide, please. Again, it's a Windows-only program, so not the most contemporary option. It does have video compression schemes, meaning you can do everything up to uncompressed video if you have the bandwidth. But the compression that's available out of the box is actually quite old, and it works, but it doesn't look that great. Next slide, please. H323, which I'm connected with today, continues to be a platform of choice for a number of reasons. One, the quality that we're able to obtain, and I'm speaking specifically about Polycom devices right now. Polycom has a proprietary audio format that is particularly good for music, which is why we've chosen that manufacturer. But the reason it's so popular, H323 overall, obviously, as you all know, is it's quite ubiquitous. It can be found on most college campuses. Most universities have an H323 device. It's a commercial solution, so it's well supported most of the time. And it offers extended security features, which some of these other tools don't have. Next slide, please. So again, some of the good things, it's HD resolution, relatively low bandwidth, does allow for error correction, easy multi-point in some instances, and onboard echo cancellation, which a lot of these tools that we're talking about don't have. And whenever a tool does not have echo cancellation, it requires a trained audio engineer in order to make these things work. Next slide, please. They also tend to be pretty expensive compared to some of the software solutions. Although Polycom recently incorporated their proprietary audio format into their software, their Real Presence desktop solution. So it is slightly more accessible than it was previously. Next slide, please. UltraGrid is a software that we have been using quite extensively over the past several years, mostly because it has extended capacity for high resolution video, which is something none of these other tools really provide for. So it's been around for a long time. It's got a really good development team behind it. And it was originally used for scientific imagery in medical practices, but since then has just become a solution for streaming very high resolution video with multi-channel audio. Next slide, please. So like Conference XP, UltraGrid can pretty much work with whatever hardware or webcams or audio interfaces you have, as long as those devices are supported by your operating system and they work in other applications. UltraGrid can use it. And as I said before, it has capacity for up to 8K video resolution, which is pretty unique on the market. And it's also free. So if you haven't played with this tool much, I would suggest you try. It currently does not have a graphical user interface. It's a command line program. So there's a little bit of a learning curve, but the development team is really excellent in helping new institutions get up on their feet. Next slide, please. Latency, for UltraGrid tends to be pretty good, although in practice it ranges from approximately 80 milliseconds to, depending on compression and several settings, 500 milliseconds. So it just depends on how you configure it. If you're going to be doing high resolution video, it requires a lot of bandwidth. Next slide, please. Lola is the new kid on the block, as they say. It was originally released in 2011 and developed by the Italian Research and Education Network, GAR. it's a Windows only tool, but that's the only real negative that I can find about it. It works with either color or black and white video up to HD resolution. And what's special about Lola is it is extremely fast. So normally, for instance, as I said with UltraGrid, encoding latency can start at 80 milliseconds. Lola is 3 to 5 milliseconds. And that's because it leverages very specific USB 3 cameras. So it's a little bit more complicated to use because the tools are very specific, but the price point, the amount of money to build a Lola host is actually not so bad. It's about $2,000 US. Next slide, please. As I said, it's got variable video resolution and is also multi-channel compatible. So one new thing that we are exploring as an institution is the idea of distributed recording studio. So we're working with a recording studio in Atlanta, but also in the United Kingdom to remotely record musicians here at New World for productions that are actually happening in other cities. So that's something that prior to Lola was not possible. Lola does have a simple graphical user interface, so your average computer user can use it as long as the network is set up appropriately. Next slide, please. It does require quite a bit of bandwidth in most cases. If you're using uncompressed video, we're talking about 250 megabits per second up to about 800, depending on the resolution and the frame rate of the video you are using. It does have onboard compression, and with that enabled, you add a few milliseconds of latency, but you're able to keep the bandwidth consumption around 20 megabits per second each direction. It's not currently multi-point, but that's supposed to be coming with the next release. Next slide, please. So these next few slides are just kind of demonstrating how these different tools measure against our different 4 metric areas. As you can see here, as far as ease of use, just because of the way the software runs, Lola and H323 are the easiest to use of this collection. Next slide, please. For audio video quality, again, Lola, UltraGrid, and H323 and Conference XP, they're all capable of HD resolutions, but Lola allows for super high frame rates, which can be really advantageous for performing arts. And UltraGrid, as I said many times, is super high resolution video, so it's the only one of these tools that can go above traditional HD. Next slide, please. Latency, Lola far and away wins this category, followed by UltraGrid, and then H323 and Conference XP are pretty comparable in practice. Next slide, please. As far as accessibility here, Conference XP and UltraGrid win simply because you can use pretty much any video device, any audio device, any computer you have on hand to actually use the software. Next slide, please. This slide is intentionally confusing, and it's that way because it's meant to reinforce what I said at the beginning. Basically, the way that we go about choosing which tool we're going to use for any of these activities is based on the needs of that activity. So if it's a live performance where people are performing together over distance, Lola is the obvious choice because we need that level of low latency in order to actually make it happen. If it's a video art piece that's being streamed alongside a live event somewhere else, then maybe UltraGrid is the best choice because we can stream that content in 4K resolution. If we're just trying to have a music lesson and we don't know our collaborator very well, we usually start with H323 because we know they've got one of those in their closet. So as you can see, it really depends on just what you're trying trying to accomplish as far as which one of these tools to use. Next slide, please. So just some general observations about where the technology is and where it needs to go. Most of these tools are still pretty expensive. If we're talking about individual users being able to acquire them themselves, it still requires that institutional level in order to obtain a lot of these things. Most of them require some level of understanding of audio and video and networking in order to make them really impactful. And what Lola has recently shown us is that we've been able to reduce the latency in the software package itself so much that now it's the network that is slowing transmissions down. The only reason that we can't do a live Lola performance between Florida and California is because the trip there and the trip back is more than 90% of the delay in the signal chain. So not sure how we fix that problem short of changing the speed of light, but maybe some network manufacturers are going to surprise us in the next few years. Another interesting problem that Lola revealed is display technology. A lot of modern televisions and PC displays have a lot of latency in their, just in the way that they produce an image. So many times it's not Lola that is too slow, it's the TV or PC monitor that you're looking at is inducing or adding delay that isn't necessarily there. The other obvious one is that all of these tools are Ethernet dependent. Just simply Wi-Fi can't handle the bandwidth consumption and the error-free nature of the traffic that these tools require. Next slide, please. The next few slides, we're going to get out of the weeds, out of the technology side, and just look at a couple use cases. So the Infinite Bridge project was a performance at one of the recent network performing arts production workshops. And here it was just basically a combination of visual artists, musicians, dancers, and other performers that were distributed between London, Denmark, and I believe Barcelona. And they were all brought together in a single point for this kind of multimedia performance, which you can see a picture of here. Next slide, please. Near in the distance is another example of one of these multi-site performance events. This was produced by the University of Performing Arts and Music in Vienna with the support of their research and education network in Austria called ACONET. And they do these shows once a year, and they are easily the most impressive and immersive from a production standpoint. So if you have an opportunity to attend one of their events, I highly recommend it. Next slide, please. So we saw a little bit of video from the Trombone Global Audition Training Project in the beginning. This is a really cool project that brings together 5 institutions at the moment. It's New World Symphony in Miami Beach, the Cleveland Institute of Music in Ohio, the Shanghai Conservatory in China, the Royal Danish Academy of Music in Denmark, and the Royal College of Music in London. And the idea here is that every 4 times a year we gather in a group H.323 video conference and have students at each location play common orchestra audition excerpts for faculty members at each of the locations. And through this program, the idea is that the students get a chance to play for faculty and professional musicians in a variety of geographical locations, but also it allows them to understand the specifics or the nuance of classical music in different regions around the world. So it's a very interesting project which has been very impactful for both faculty members and for students in understanding musical trends kind of all over the place. Next slide, please. Magic versus Motor City. This is another performance from a recent Network Performing Arts production workshop at New World Symphony. The idea of this was to create an urban dance battle on the stage of New World Symphony between local breakdancers in Miami and urban dancers in Detroit, Michigan, who are they are keepers of a dance form called the JIT, which is a very specific dance form that came from Detroit. So we had them do this kind of traditional dance cipher, as they call it, or dance battle on stage. And to support them with music, we had performers, musicians from New World Symphony performing with students from a university in Detroit as well, who were on site with the dancers there. So it was a really awesome experience just because it was art being created on both sides, but there were also live audiences on both sides. So in a normal situation, we're kind of bringing people together for a single performance location. But in this case, there were audiences on both sides, and the experience was quite different between the two. Next slide, please. Moving from collaborative performance, this is just a screenshot of the Mosaic project, which Delma referenced in the beginning. Mosaic is a desire for us at New World to share the teaching that goes on here with the outside world. So what you'll find if you go to mosaic.nws.edu is right now a video library that kind of contains much of the teaching from the faculty members we bring in, but also lessons and master classes taught by collaborating universities. There are 9 partnering universities in total that are providing content to this effort. So it's a completely free service. It's highly searchable, highly browsable, and very useful for students who are taking auditions in classical music, be it either professionally or for university, but also for the faculty and teachers who are going to be teaching those students. So there's a lot of good material there, and I encourage everyone to visit that website at some point after today. Next slide, please. So yeah, just a little more about Mosaic. These stats are actually old at this point, but there's right now about 850 videos in the library total. The partner group, which I mentioned, includes lots of famous conservatories like Curtis Institute of Music, San Francisco Conservatory, Manhattan School of Music, Cleveland Institute of Music, and all of these groups are building this body of content together to share with the outside world. We host regular webcasts there. They can range from actual concerts to just conversations with music professionals and our fellows. So especially for those of you who have younger musicians at your universities or institutions, definitely encourage them to come and watch those events, because it's an opportunity for them not only to enjoy the webcasts and the performances, but to actually ask questions of those groups if any of them are aspiring professional or want to continue their studies into university. So the goal ultimately of Mosaic is to create a vibrant online community, and eventually we'll have all of these people speaking with each other along with the faculty members. Next slide, please. So I've been talking quite a bit about the Network Performing Arts Production Workshop. This, as I said, this is an annual workshop that is an opportunity for all of our partners around the world really to come to either New World or another location in Europe and share experiences, share what is current and emerging in terms of video communications and technology, and to collaborate and figure out new projects to work on together. So the website URL is there, npapws.org. Registration is not live yet, but that will happen towards the end of this year. And if any of you are interested in meeting really kind of the institutions and the people who are at the center of performing arts on networks, this is the place to do it. So I highly encourage putting aside some resources to come join us at that time. Next slide, please. So yeah, here's a breakdown of some of that stuff that I was just mentioning. It's a really not to be missed event. If you can't come this year to New World, please do consider going next year. And I believe the host site for 2019 is in the Czech Republic. Next slide, please. Here's a shot from a performance from our last Network Performing Arts production workshop. It was a violin concerto commissioned for this workshop, where the violin soloist was actually in North Carolina, performing with the use of Lola, with live projections and the orchestra, as you can see on stage. Next slide, please. This is a demo of one of Ultra Grid's hardware platforms. It was one of our trumpet players playing along with an organist in Czech Republic. Now, normally this situation would have so much latency that you wouldn't be able to play together necessarily, but because of the way that organs work and the tradition of an organ being very separate from any other musicians they might be playing with on a church stage, the latency or the delay is actually very similar over the internet as it would be in the physical space. So they did this experiment and it actually worked quite well. Next slide, please. Here's just a screenshot of the NPAPWS website. There's not just information about the workshop there, but you can find a lot of more information about the tools that I've been speaking about today. And also, it includes some contact information for some of our principal collaborators. So if you're looking for someone to build a project with, this is a good resource. Next slide, please. We'll go through these pretty quickly, but just to share with you where our ideas are headed in terms of what's next. Next slide, please. We are heavily looking at augmented reality and how that's going to inform these video systems that we are using. We've already done some prototype work with a couple of the VR headsets like Oculus and the Microsoft HoloLens, just to imagine different ways. I mean, this is kind of an obvious application you see in the picture, but we're actively brainstorming how we can use these technologies in a really novel and compelling way. Next slide, please. This is some shots of 360 video productions. We've gotten into this, dove into this head first. We're doing 360 video shoots pretty regularly here at New World as webcasts, but also just still imagery shots. Next slide, please. Here's another 360 video rectangular shot. And when 360 video becomes really interesting is when you pair it with immersive audio. Next slide, please. So right now we have been doing experiments with both binaural audio and ambisonic, which are basically just microphone arrays that create a very kind of 3D audio-like experience on headphones or in a speaker field. And pairing that with 360 video just to see how immersive of an online experience we can create for different types of activities. It could be obviously attending a performance, but also working in an educational context. Next slide, please. That's the end. So there's my contact information. We are very, as I said, very open to sharing our knowledge that we've gained over the years and to helping institutions use these tools for the first time. we fully realize that the way we create a sustainable network of partners is by being open and sharing. So that's New World's role, we believe, in this space is to be that central point of network and communication among all of our partners. So we are open and willing to help in whatever way we can, especially with the effort that you all are embarking on in terms of building a performing arts network in South America. We benefit from sharing a time zone with many of your countries, but also proximity. We're very close, and we exchange culture and people all the time. So we're very interested in bridging the experience through any online means that we have. So if you have questions about anything I've shared, please feel free. I see we got one question from actually a university in France, which was specifically about Lola, whether it has, let's see if I'm getting this question correctly. Does Lola have less latency audio or video? If you're comparing Lola to the other tools that we spoke about, Lola is far and away the lowest latency of any of those tools. The video and audio latency, they are streamed in one combined channel, so it's not like there's any difference or disparity between audio latency or video latency. It's just one. It's just one signal that's being transmitted by the application. Which is the best for video streaming? Again, I think from my perspective, if video is your core concern and latency is not, UltraGrid will give you the best performance. UltraGrid works really well with professional audio capture devices, so we use it regularly with Blackmagic capture devices, capture cards, Aja, so professional video gear, but you can also use webcams, and really any video format the camera is capable of capturing can be streamed over UltraGrid. So it's very flexible, it's very powerful. How is collaboration established? So for us, we have very good regular partners in the US who not only help us maintain a certain amount of programming, but help us to find new ideas and new things to try. So in the US, the Cleveland Institute of Music, Manhattan School of Music, Eastman School of Music, and I'm sure I'm forgetting others, but those, University of Southern California, all of these institutions are doing this type of work regularly and are regular collaborators. And I think once you have that core group of kind of power players or central organizations that are kind of keeping things fresh and vital, it draws new people in. So for instance, the public library system in Chattanooga, Tennessee recently built several Lola computers that they just now provide access to the general public to come up with ideas about how to use. That never would have happened, I think, without the kind of usage that the principal players are putting out there and demonstrating. Going to the workshops is really important. Again, that's where all the collaborators who have the resources and the knowledge to produce these events and these productions, that's where they are. And then how else is collaboration established? Well, I mean, you got to do your research. Obviously, Delma originally contacted me through my personal website. Whatever means you have, you just need to find the one person at a particular university or institution you'd like to work at who is going to take on a leadership role and really push whatever your concept is forward. So you want to find whoever that person is and kind of leverage them to the best of your ability. Any other questions? We have some more videos we can play with what time remains. I would just ask the folks at Kudi just to play a minute and a half or so of each of these. These are just video segments from the recent Network Performing Arts production workshop, which give a better description of what happens there than me talking about it. So please feel free to play those when you're ready. And I'll take questions if any come up. Move to the next video, please. You can go to the next video if you'd like. Sorry, I was just saying you can move to the next video. So this was a live dance performance between Havana, Cuba, and Miami that was projected on the front of the building. So I believe there's a question about the type of dance in this piece. I'm not sure I can describe what the actual style is called, but the choreographer is a woman by the name of Jana Bidarova. She is originally from the Czech Republic, and her choreography, as I read from her website, is based in just everyday body movement and the science of body movement itself, conscious body movement. So I hope that answers that question. If not, I would refer you to her website, which is movementtouch.com. Any other questions? Well, I'd like to thank Delma and the Nia Cultural for the opportunity to share all this with you today. And if you're looking for collaborators, please consider the New World Symphony. We are always looking for new projects and new ideas to explore. So thank you, everyone, for your attention, and to all the translators for their hard work. I hope I didn't speak too quickly. Oh, there's a comment about including candombe in this type of a format. I'm not sure if that was a question or just a general comment, but yeah, I mean, anything is really possible. These tools just provide us a means for sharing experience and culture visually, so no reason to limit ourselves.
Thank you, Justin. This online event is just only a small begin. Thank you very much for all attendees and the academic network in Latin America for the support. Thank you, Justin, for sharing your experience and work with us. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. It's a privilege.
Okay, this is the end of video conference. Thank you very much again. I suppose we are keeping contact between Justin and the attendees and the national network. See you in the next event.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado a todos.